Hello everybody, welcome back to the live stream. Today we have a guest. Again, we always have amazing guests, and Verdell Jessup is joining us today. As we wait for some people to get on, we're just going to get into things anyways because I don't like to leave big lapses. To anybody watching the replay, we just have to sit around, right? So, Verdell is a nervous system consultant. So, I think this is something that's really not widely known and always understood. That a lot of health issues actually start with nervous system dysregulation, and that is connected to trauma. So I'd like to start by just asking if you could explain what trauma is, and then maybe explain the function of the nervous system.
Great, thank you. Trauma is anything that causes overwhelm in the system. That could be hearing a door slam and being caught off guard. So it doesn't have to necessarily be a traumatic event. And again, trauma, the official definition, is anything that causes overwhelm in a system. My system might respond very different to a loud noise, to a car backfiring, than Alicia's. No two nervous systems are created the same. Our autonomic nervous system is autonomic. So it's really hard to actually gauge, measure, or study because it's constantly responding to the environment, to the sounds, to the smells, to noises. So our nervous system is always fluctuating according and responding to the environment that we're in. Particularly the vagus nerve, which is being really hyped up right now and everyone's talking about it. And the vagus nerve is their second largest nerve bundle, and it's also referred to as the wandering nerve. This wandering nerve is responsible for our hormones, pupil dilation, respiration, heart rate, and all our digestion. So if we have a dysregulated nervous system from a past or a current event, which is disrupting your digestion, your sleep, your organs, hormones, skin conditions, it means that something is offline in one of those systems that is not allowing it to function fully. So we can get stuck in these biological freezes, whether we're in a fight response, a freeze response, or in a run response.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. I've been working on my nervous system now for a little over a year, and learning how your own nervous system works and learning how to regulate it is really the greatest gift that I gave myself, because I knew I'm quite body aware and have a background in fitness, and I understood that there was something going on within me. I am formally trained in working with the subconscious mind as an NLP practitioner, and I knew that working with the subconscious mind was not enough. And a friend had told me about somatic work and somatic experiencing, and I was experiencing anxiety and skin issues, and I knew that they were interconnected. So I searched online, and I searched somatic experiencing and skin conditions, and found a blog that Verdell had written, and realized that we live in the same city, so that was really wonderful. I had already listened to a book by the man who developed somatic experiencing. His name is Dr. Peter A. Levine, and he is brilliant. Just search his name, Dr. Peter A. Levine, and find one of his books and dig into it if you want to start learning on your own. But when a nervous system is dysregulated, it can be really frightening. Like, we feel unsafe in our own bodies, and this is often sort of brushed off, I guess, in society as saying, like, you need to change your mindset. So why is working with the mind on its own not enough to overcome, anxiety, PTSD, etc.?
Definitely. I guess the best example I'm going to use is wearing a mask. So right now, in public places, we have to be wearing a mask. And how a mask changes an individual's face is really disrupting to the nervous system. So we're walking around with half of our face covered, and to a small child, they really respond to all the micro little features and movements, subtle cues that our face gives in order to determine whether someone is safe or not safe. So when we go to talk therapy, we can talk our way around things. Some people are highly gifted about talking, and there's an expression of being able to talk your way out of a wet paper bag. So talk therapy is looking at what I would refer to as one of the shortcuts. We hope by talking about our experience that we'll get over our experience. That said, if we're going to talk therapy and they can bring some somatic and interoceptions, with the feelings and sensations that you have inside, it can really start to shift what's going on in your autonomic nervous system. That said, that it's really important if we've had developmental trauma, which is trauma that lasts over a longer period of time, that, and especially developmental, it's prior to being 5 years old. And often it occurs in our family home or with relatives of who we trust. And what can happen when we have trauma at that age, it's not verbal. We don't have the prefrontal cortex online in order to reason, in order to remember events that happened, in order to remember what mom might have said or someone might have tried to convince us. And so when we've had nonverbal trauma prior to us having full use of our language and cognitive prefrontal cortex, it falls into developmental trauma, and it's there where we really want to seek a modality of healing that is body-based. Because your body has the memory of the events, whether we are cognitive of it or not. It is stored in the body. And the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, will have its own way of really explaining and demonstrating and acting out what that story is when you're actually working with someone who's working at the body level. And the nervous system, working at the autonomic nervous system, is really important to work at, because so many of my clients have come to me after having 30, 40 years of tried talk therapy, tried everything under the sun. CBT, they've tried even using some alternative plant medicine to help, and it's really just trying to take shortcuts to what the body has remembered. And it's not uncommon for someone's body to go into a pattern, a moving pattern when they're with me, when I'm working with them, that they'll say, what is this? Why is my hand shaking? And we don't need to know the story. We don't need to put words to it, because when that event happened to us, maybe there weren't words. So we just need to give an environment the safety, the space to actually allow something to complete that hasn't complete, or to be able to exercise a self-protective response, pushing something away or protecting yourself from a ball hitting you that it didn't have the opportunity to do in the time of the event. So we can go and repair those past ones, events, adverse experiences, but it really needs to be focused on the body.
Yeah, and speaking about that, one of the most interesting experiences that I had early on in this work was laying on the table, and because this is body work that we're doing, and I started sprinting, like I was laying down flat, and my legs and arms started moving. It was unconscious. I was not doing it myself, and so I was completing some stored flight energy that I never had the opportunity to use at some point in my life. And like you said, we don't need to know the story. And I have noticed in my work with coaching and stuff like that is that sometimes people get attached to stories, and we get attached to telling our story and finding a sense of safety in a story. And that's where it's so important to integrate the body work, because if we stay attached to a story, then it becomes our identity, and it's harder to heal when you have an identity.
Story is a really big piece, because what they found with complex PTSD, especially the community that's really highly worked with is veterans, because they've been through so much protecting and fighting for freedom in our country. And what happens when we sit in a group and we start to all share our story and our trauma verbally, I start to believe that part of Alicia's story is my story. I somehow weave that in because I'm so open and receptive to something changing. And so what they found with veterans is it was actually detrimental for them just to show up into these group therapy and constantly just tell their story, the same story over and over again. It was actually doing more harm to their system than good. And it was better to actually ask them, Alicia, when that bomb went off, I don't want to know what you did. I want to know what you wish you did. So we start to create an alternate story, a different outcome that we wished had gone on, perceived, actually happened, rather than getting stuck in that old behavior that we were unsuccessful. I mean, luckily, we're still alive today, but it could have been a different outcome. And so just by starting to shift the story in our brain and getting away what's been imprinted, and just to step away from veterans, that will actually happen from our own families. So we might not have memory of an event, but we have heard in family gatherings where, oh, Verdell, you were just so sensitive when you were a child, and you would do this thing. And you would do this thing so much that you would have these little mental breakdowns, and you'd go into a corner and you would hide because you didn't get what you wanted. Well, that's not my memory of it. My memory of it was there is some threat of it. But what do is I start to believe what I felt and experienced in that moment wasn't actually what was going on, because the adults are telling a different story. And we often start to believe someone outside of ourselves rather than our own experience, especially interoception. So when I get nervous, maybe I start to get a fluttery heart and my palms get sweaty. But someone might see me and say, you're not nervous, there's nothing here to be nervous about. And they try to discredit, and not to any harm of us, but that's just what they were taught. And so the more we can come back to hold space for what everyone's own personal, authentic experience is, and just hold it for whatever they say it is. I feel nervous right now, my stomach is in knots, and I have sweaty palms. And I would just say, you're nervous right now, your stomach is knots, and you have sweaty palms. I don't need to create something more around that. It's just really taking in what the person is experiencing. To come back to something you mentioned, is that if we've had a lot of physical trauma, whether it is from injuries playing sports as children, growing up on a farm, or inappropriate touch or sexual abuse, what might happen is that we become unaware of our body. The only way possibly to survive is to go numb. So it's not uncommon for me to have individuals come that have had sexual trauma who can't feel anything really below their solar plexus. And that is a survival pattern. And that pattern has protected them, but it might not be currently serving them with what they're doing in life, with their partner, with just feeling as a whole individual again. So when anyone is working with me, it's really important that we move really slow, because stepping back in and feeling a part of yourself that you've closed off for 20, 30, 40 years can be really scary and terrifying. And also the sensations that come with it can be really alarming to someone. They actually will say, am I dying? Am I dying? I have this sensation. And I'll be like, no, you're actually coming alive. Your feelings, your nerves, your muscles, the fluid is actually starting to flow back in. And so it's always a fine line when someone's healing, because there will be a sense of overwhelm. We are so used to this being our normal that when we start to open up just a little bit, our system wants to clamp right back down because the old is familiar. And so when healing, we have to be really patient and compassionate with ourselves so that we give space for the times that it's going to be uncomfortable as our system starts to shift and start to open up. And we have to be aware of when we try to clamp it back down and just say it's okay to start to expand and come back into myself. But coming back into ourself and learning about interoception and what it feels for someone to touch me, how I notice that from the outside of my skin to the inside of my skin, is like learning a new foreign language. It's like us learning Dzongkha, which is the national language in Bhutan. It might take us a couple of years to learn Dzongkha and be fluent in it. No different than learning how to be comfortable and back in our own body. And Peter Levine actually calls his work soul retrieval because of the event that caused us to leave part of ourselves or shut down ourselves. It needs to be reawoken and invited back. We need to bring our soul and our sensations back to our own self.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. Soul retrieval. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Mm-hmm. When trauma hits, what happens is we can create parts or fractures, and we lose part of ourselves, almost like pieces. So if you're into making puzzles, and there's your 1,000-piece puzzle, and all of a sudden you go to finish it and you're like, I'm missing 2 pieces. That's what trauma is. Those pieces are missing. And so we need to go and find someone to help us to find where those pieces are. Where did we lose them? And we don't need to know why, but just where are they? And how can we reintegrate them and bring them back home so that we are complete? And it's amazing doing the work, how it can shift things that we think are just who I am. This is just how I am. And when we start working at the body level, you might notice some of your coping mechanisms, management strategies. So one management strategy is being OCD, very compulsive about how things are placed, how things are clean. This is just our attempt to try to keep the environment safer. If it's cleaner and organized, I feel safer. And we will go to any extent to try to feel safe. With that safety comes a lot of control. We want to control our partner, every move, where he puts a plant, how it's organized, what we wear, our hair, everything. And so the more trauma we've had, often the more controlling we are in our environments, with our friends. We can actually push people away. And within this whole working with the nervous system, we also have a learned behavior of how we attach, our attachment style.
Yes.
So depending on how well organized our parents were and their attachment style from their trauma, from their parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, it all filters down into me. I'm a collection of my family's trauma. It's not all on me to process it, but the more I do my work, the more energetically it shifts all of my brother, my father, my mother, my sister, it really starts to change. So even though if I have an issue with my father, he doesn't have to do the work. I need to look at myself and see, where am I getting upset, irritated, belittled? I need to look at myself and say, where can I do my work? And if I shift, then regardless of them not doing any work, things will start to shift. So frequencies, I'm of certain frequency, Alicia's a certain frequency. If I start getting better, healing, and doing my work, my deep, deep work at the nervous system, my frequency is going to change. How people perceive me, how blood runs through me is going to be different. And so the next time I see Alicia, she might be like, there's something different with Verdell. And maybe at that point she'll say, I don't resonate with them anymore, because maybe our frequencies are no longer aligned. And so one process that's really important when we're doing work is notice when we need to let people go in our lives. And so as I grow, I'm going to shed. And that shedding might be a good friend, it might be a partner, it might be a parent, it might be my siblings. And this also requires really strong boundaries and healthy boundaries. We can have unhealthy boundaries, which are toxic, and we can have healthy boundaries. I'm really an advocate for healthy boundaries. With that, we have to be very consistent. And I know we work with this a lot together, is consistency. If I draw a line in the sand that says, you don't pass this line, this is my boundary, but sometimes I let you cross, that's not being consistent. So we really have to think about what our boundaries are and stay really, really consistent. And this is going to be really hard and difficult. And sometimes we're going to lose the people that we thought were the closest to us, but they actually might be causing a lot of our pain and our suffering. They might be abusing us, even though it feels like it's a loving way. They're my parent or my brother who's trying to manipulate me to do certain things for the benefit of them. And so we have to figure out, where am I in life, and what do I want, and where are my boundaries? And as I shift, people are going to shift around me, and they're not always going to like who I'm becoming. And so this is probably one of the hardest things that I have to share with people, is that when you start to do the work of the nervous system at the deepest level possible, you're going to have people that are trying to pull you back, that are trying to discourage you from doing the work, because they don't want you to change. They like how they're able to treat you and get you to do things for them. But this is really detrimental to ourselves. So I always say, I have a little saying on a chalkboard, are you your own first choice? So when I'm asked if I want to go for a walk, I have to be like, okay, do I want to go for a walk? Okay, yes, I do want to go for a walk. Do I want to go for a walk just to spend time with the other person? Do I want more of their time? Or am I doing it because I really want to? And I really want to walk through life taking care of myself, really looking after my needs. And again, people aren't going to like that. So my analogy I would use is a hub of a wheel, so a bicycle wheel. So in the middle you have the hub, and from out it you have all the spokes. And these spokes represent my partner, my mother, my father, my best friend, some of my work colleagues. But if my hub starts shifting over here, this spoke, this individual, might not like it. So they might actually try to drag me back, to bring trauma or drama to suck me back to where I was. But really the biggest key is having awareness to it and be like, wow, this person's really trying to pull me back, but I don't want to be there. And so I always use chess takes two people to play.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to choose, are we going to play the game or are we going to walk away from the game? And I always highly recommend walking away from the game. Don't keep playing, moving one pawn, because they're going to move again, and then you're hooked. You're into that old pattern, and it's just going to suck and put you back into a vortex that you don't want to be in. And so it's not easy work, and it takes time, but you can really start to see things shift in life when you do the work. For myself personally, I used to be a fainter. So I could be in an environment and my body perceived stress, not consciously, unconsciously, and I would collapse and I'd be on the floor. And then when I came to, I'd be like, oh my gosh, what was so stressful? I have no idea what was so stressful. And this started happening more and more. So by doing the work, it's been now over 20 years that I haven't fainted. It's the longest I've actually gone in my life without fainting, which is huge. So one analogy is I have a plate, a platter, and all of my traumas, my coping mechanisms, my management strategies and daily obligations. I have kids to look after, I have food to make, I need to get to work on time, I need to go to the gym. These are all on this platter. And this is what, in the medical term, is called my allostatic load. This allostatic load is what my system is carrying, which might be too much to maintain a healthy nervous system, being able to sleep well, have good digestion, and have really good skin. But if there's too much on this platter, and for my allostatic load, I'm stressing my heart. I'm stressing my vascular system. If I'm carrying too much weight, it's harder on my arteries to move blood from my heart down to my feet, and for my veins to bring it back than if I'm actually maintaining a healthy weight. And so trauma is also on top. It's like the cherries on top of all this other stuff that we're carrying. And we don't want to have a heavy allostatic load because it leads to autoimmune diseases, it leads to diabetes, it leads to sleep issues. The list is long. Skin conditions are all because the allostatic load is too much. And again, some of the stressors might be invisible, so it's not always just easy to see. It takes some time of digging around, lifting things up and being like, what have I hid? What have I tucked away? Or what have I forgotten in order just to survive?
Yeah, and we live in a time where there is obviously a lot of stress in the collective, and everyone's going through their own individual traumatic experience. So although the experience is, this is happening, well, there's a few different narratives about what's happening, but, these are the things that are happening. Every single person is going to be experiencing it differently, and everyone's nervous system will be having a different reaction to the same events, and that's really important to consider when we're going through a collective traumatic experience.
Yeah, to share something on that, they've looked at studying triplets, twins, quadruples, to see that if we all had them here and we did the same amount of trauma, gave them the same experience, all three triplets, what would happen later when we actually interviewed them? What would they say their experience was, their story? What did they feel while that was happening? Well, what they realized is it didn't matter if they had the exact DNA and genetic makeup. All three of them had a different story, had a different experience. No two nervous systems respond the same way to a traumatic event. How we respond to events is really a learned behavior. I say, luckily, my parents were really shut down when I was a child. extremely shut down. So even when my father cut open his leg and required 27 stitches and I was there that day, he just calmly asked me to rip up rags, tie them around his leg, prevent my grandmother from seeing him, and he actually drove himself to the hospital. So if you can imagine, when I'm 13 years old, what did I learn? I learned that if you cut your leg open, you remain calm and collected, and it's a no big deal, and I'll drive myself to the hospital. Yeah, the house could blow up, and my parents would be like, oh, the house blew up. So my parents taught me that even when the shit hits the fan, I'm really calm. I didn't grow up feeling their anxiety, their trauma, seeing them sweat, because they were so shut down. So it's taken me a while to get out of that shut down stage and feel more alive and be more animated and being able to undulate my words because of the modeling I received. And as a child, I would go over to a friend's house where their parents were animated, they threw things, they yelled at each other, they slammed doors, and I'd be like, wow, that's too much for my nervous system. Like, I need to go back home. And it's not that one is better than the other, it was just different. And we each grow up in different households with learning how we respond, whether it's how we respond to some traumatic event that we watch on the news, whether it responds to the fear of COVID and how it's running through countries and now we're on different variants. If you grew up in a fearful home with fearful parents, you can imagine that more than likely that is how you're going to respond to what's going on in the world right now. If you grew up in an environment that didn't have a lot of fear, that was fairly nonchalant, no big deal, that is how you're going to respond as an adult. Unless for either one of those situations, unless you do work or you have a major event that really alters, catapults you over to the other side. So Peter Levine also works a lot with individuals with near-death experiences. And when we survive a near-death experience, which again, the definition of that is anytime we lose consciousness, whether it's on our own or through medical surgeries. So when I lose consciousness, I end up somewhere else. And when I come back to, I need to figure out on what side of the coin am I on? Am I on the experience that I feel like I saw angels, it's angelic, I just have a second opportunity at life? Or do I come out of that experience being angry and almost caught in a very dark cycle? And so part of the work with near-death experiences, which surgeries, fainting, so I had no idea when I was sitting in a training of near-death experiences that I had near-death experiences, a multitude of them. So it's really interesting that we need to thread the needle. And so his workshop is called Eye of the Needle. So whatever side I ended on from that very traumatic event, that lost consciousness, I need to get to the other side. We need to stitch it back together. And it's really, really delicate and precious work, because the system almost needs to come back to being unconscious and almost flatlining in order to come through to the other side. It is very, very delicate work. And that work is really what shifted my life. Because of the fainting, and I also have electrical trauma, getting caught in an electric fence growing up on a farm, some lightning, being sensitive to any physiotherapy pads that rapid fire your muscles. I have seizures. So I also had lots of skin conditions from all the electrical charges. And that, anytime we're nearly shocked, nearly electrocuted, and the other one that it's called fluid trauma, is when we've had a near drowning or if we have been poisoned. So food poisoning, or there are some incidences where parents would slightly poison their children in order to get medical attention, which is very devastating for a family and for a child. And so when we've had electrical shock therapy, even medical trauma is in there, that what happens is my nervous system as a whole feels like that shock is too much, that electrical charge is too much. Lightning, is also in there. That my body goes into a biologic protective response, which is to shunt all the fluid just to my center of my body to take care to keep my organs moist. So if you saw me 11 years ago and you saw my skin, my legs particularly, I looked like a cross between an old elephant and a snake. I had the deep skin grooves, but then I also shedded astronomically every day because I had no fluid in my extremities. I was also always extremely cold. My feet would be almost blue all the time. And so working with fluid trauma, I was able to get that fluid back into my extremities. But to share of how uncomfortable that was, is that when my fluid started to move, my system almost went into a panic because it hadn't been moisturizing the inside of me for years, over 17 years. And so what happened was I became the Pillsbury Doughboy for 3 days. All of the fluid came into my digits, my hands, my legs, but it didn't know where to go. My body forgot how to absorb fluid. So I looked huge, and the trainer that I was working with just laughed at me, and he said, well, I think before you leave Texas, you're going to have to buy new clothes. And I was like, this can't last. And so over a few days, my body started to absorb that fluid and be able to move it into my extremities, to my legs. And my skin changed so much that when I flew back into Vancouver, one of my best friends was picking me up at the airport. And I had a skirt on, and she flew my skirt up and started touching my skin and pinching me because she could see, and I didn't tell her what happened, she could see the difference in my skin. Wow. And wanted to know why my skin was so different. And so trauma can really affect us on so many different levels that we don't think about. And we don't openly talk about what's happened to us. Some families are really ashamed of the trauma they've experienced, so they really stash it into a box, Pandora's box, and hide it. They don't want to open it up. But what we don't want to do is we don't want to take this and carry it around and weight down our allostatic load and go to our grave with this. It's really important that we talk and we seek nervous system health so that we are healthier, that we are stronger, we're more resilient. If my nervous system is always fighting all this other stuff that's linked to past trauma, how can I stay healthy and fight the influenza flu that's coming this fall? Another example is COVID. It is a virus. The stronger I am, the faster I can fight it off. The less sick I am, it's not extended, I don't become a COVID long hauler. And that's really what they're finding is in the COVID long haulers, and my heart goes out to them, is that their prior medical history and conditions and autoimmune and viruses that are all in their body, if you add COVID, SARS into that, it's too much for their system to fight. And so they get trapped even more fighting, and they end up with these symptoms that last forever. And there's some individuals that have been fighting COVID long hauler symptoms for over 2 years now in Canada alone. And so it's really important that we do the nervous system work, we eat really healthy, we get lots of sleep, and we seek out help. All of us need support in life. And it's really important to find someone who you resonate with as a practitioner, as a counselor, that not all 2 counselors or individuals are the same. You need to find someone who resonates with you that can help you move through whatever traumas you have. And at some point you might outgrow each other. And it's either for the client or the practitioner to say, I think we've outgrown each other, and maybe it's time that I refer you to a colleague or someone else. Because what might happen if an individual has, like the practitioner, if they have a lot of trauma that's still unresolved, and if a client comes in and their trauma is very similar to my trauma, what happens is we start to merge. And we never want to merge, and we never want to transfer or put my stuff on someone else. So it's really, I can't stress how important it is to really shop around to a practitioner that can really help and support you. And that you have that conversation that we're here to work through things together. One of the best things that can ever happen in my practice, I think which is really important. People might be like, this sounds strange. But if there's a rupture between me and a client, that we have an opportunity to move through that rupture in a healthy way. Because that is one thing that we haven't experienced as children.
Yeah.
There's rarely any resolution that is happening in a healthy way that is not about the practitioner, but it's about the client being able to move through it in a healthy way and be heard and felt and held, to be able to process that and actually be demonstrated what a healthy resolution, repair of a rupture looks like, opposed to what's happened as in partnership with our parents, our families. And so in a counseling setting, in an office setting, we can really, truly start to feel and hear what's going on.
Yeah, totally. I have a question, and I think this would be really important and valuable for people, is that I have noticed recently that talking about the nervous system has become more common, but in some situations it's become kind of trendy. And there are some trends out there that may not be the best trends to tell everyone to do for their nervous system health. And in saying this, they might work for some people, so I'm not here to put them down entirely, but I believe there are some trends right now that are more trendy rather than actual nervous system health. So I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Yeah, there's a few things that come up when you mention that. So one is, depending on where my nervous system is when I go to seek someone or seek a modality, whether it is meditation, whether it's cold therapy, whether it's the Hoffman, we're doing breathing, we're going to go into cold water, whether it's exploring plant medicine. It's not a cookie cutter. So Dr. Peter Levine really stresses that meditation is not for everyone. That meditation is not for someone who is shut down, depressed, lethargic, doesn't like to socialize. That is the wrong thing to seek. Their system is already showing signs of being frozen, shut down, removing themselves from society. We do not need to send them to sit for 10 days, to do a Veripassana, to see what's going on inside. They'll come out, and the suicide rates after sitting for 10 days are alarming.
I believe that.
And there's a lot of research being done in the States around this. And if someone's interested, please reach out to me and I'll share that resource. So another one would be cold therapy. Because I was so shut down and already freezing, not a whole lot of circulation going to any of my extremities, and not a lot of life in me, cold plunging would not be very beneficial to me. It would force me deeper into a freeze state. Very different if I was stuck in a flight response, always running, unable to come down, sleep 4 hours a night, no big deal, I have this, that's all I need type of person. There, we could send them to meditation and to cold therapy. Because we need to get them from one extreme to slowly start to make their gauge come over to the other way. But if you're already stuck over here, please do not seek those therapy. The other thing is plant medicine. Whether it's using MDMA, whether it's going to do ayahuasca. No individual chemicals, brain chemicals, are the same. So when you go and everyone's at ayahuasca and you're given the medicine, how you respond to the medicine is going to be different than I respond. Ayahuasca is a male drug. It is not forgiving, and it blasts open doors. It's like we're sending grenades and bombs in to your system. If you haven't done the work prior to going, and I mean a lot of deep interpersonal, transpersonal work, what happens is you might feel better afterwards for a bit. But what I've seen is that people have come undone and are haunted for months, years, decades after they've gone and done plant medicine. I've also had one client come to see me here in Vancouver who was at a stag with his buddies. And one buddy thought it would be cool to slip MDMA in all of their drinks. Well, that was fine for 9 out of the 10 guys, but for that one guy, he has never been the same. He's lost his job, his wife, his home, and his memory. He cannot remember anything. And so they tested all of them, and all they could say, the doctors that were doing all the research trying to help him figure out why, just said his brain chemical was different than all of the others. It breaks my heart to hear that story.
Yeah.
One is that there wasn't permission given. It was slipped. But two is that we're often hoping for a red pill, like in Matrix. You have the blue pill or the red pill. Which one do you want? Do you want the one that has the shortest shortcut, but we don't know how it's going to turn out, so we're going to take a chance because we want to be fixed now, we want something different now? Or do we want to take the other, the long road?
That's the red pill.
That would be the red pill. And take it slowly. And what's really important with the autonomic nervous system, the slower the therapy, the deeper the work, the more lasting. It's easier for our system to digest and integrate than it is when it's happening too fast. The other thing with therapy is that we didn't have healthy consistency in our houses. So if someone comes to see me once a month, it's probably not enough to shift the nervous system. Because what happens is you see me, you walk out of my office feeling different, but by the time you get to your car, your coping mechanisms are like, oh, that felt weird. And you try to pull back and you get back in your old behavior and walking stance because this feels familiar. But if you're able to see me in the beginning, I say we're going to front load therapy. You're going to see me a couple times a week so that you see me one day and you see me the next day and I come in and hold and do the exact same thing and your system says, oh, that's what happened yesterday. It starts to become familiar. Yeah. It's easier for the system to start to integrate, to absorb, and to start to stick to the new you. And so the slow road is way more productive, efficient, better. It's actually at a higher frequency than trying to take a shortcut. Yeah. There's a lot of other things out there that they might help in the short term, but they don't help in the long term. And we want longevity. We want the work that you do to last for the rest of your life and not being in therapy for the rest of your life. And therapy's not cheap. And many people don't have extended benefits. And the work that I do, the somatic experiencing, and I'm also trained in the Feldenkrais method, which is a neuroplasticity modality, they're not covered yet. And so it's out of pocket, so people have to have financial means to come and see me. And hopefully that can change. Hopefully Canada's medical program can start to include that, no different than massage became part of it, acupuncture, Chinese medicine. We need to actually start adding more touch therapy, somatic experiencing, sensory motor practitioners as well into there. But yes, you have to do your research. And if one friend says that really worked for me, really go and explore yourself. Don't dive in. You want to make sure you do your research, because it truly upsets me when someone tried something and it has wrecked their life. It's never the same. You can't get that back. It's now, again, it's more stuff on your platter, on your allostatic load is now even heavier.
Yeah, definitely. When I was talking about trends, I tried breathwork before and it was extremely traumatizing for me. And so, it's another one out there where I know there's people that love it and it works for them, but for some of us it's extremely traumatizing, so it's kind of difficult that it is so trendy as well as something that people are saying everyone should do this for their nervous system, because I can attest that not everybody should do that for their nervous system.
Yeah, and I'll speak specifically to the breath work. It has some benefits, but again, it's not a blanket statement. That if, as a child, I survived a traumatic event by hiding, slowing down my breath, and minimizing how much energy or sounds that I was making, and I didn't ever heal from that trauma. So now my nervous system is stuck in that breathing pattern. When I'm stuck in that breathing pattern, the last thing I want to do is go to see someone who says, you're a shallow breather, it looks like you're nearly dead, and we need to expand this. No. Your system is there for a reason.
That's what happened with me.
We need to repair very gently and encourage repair to come in to replace the ruptures, but it must be very, very titrated. If we open up someone's diaphragm too fast, the amount of anxiety they're going to experience can often create them to take their lives. It can be so extreme, or to be even more shut down. Because if someone starts to try to pry something open, we overcompensate and we lock it further down. So when I'm working, the hardest people to work with, unfortunately, are those that have a lot of training in breath work, yoga, and meditation is all about controlling our breath. So often when someone's on the table, I'll have to ask them, hey, please don't control your breath. Just let it happen naturally. Because our breath always responds to the environment we are in. So again, if a big loud noise goes off, I'm probably going to gasp. And then I want my breath and my heart rate and respiration and everything to naturally come down. But I don't want someone to come in and pry me down or try to pull me down. Because the nervous system and the physiology of your body is being stuck there for a reason. So it has to be very, very gentle, extremely gentle.
Yeah. So from what I remember from my last live stream is that we can only record for an hour. So for the last couple minutes, it would be great if you could talk about what your favorite resources are for people that want to start learning about this work.
Yeah, there's many great resources. One is The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk.
It's a book.
It's a book, and it's also on Audible. It's really great. The Holistic Psychologist, she's now based in California, has a book how to do the work.
She moved.
I think she just moved to California.
She moved to Arizona.
Oh, she's in Arizona now. Oprah's recent book with Dr. Bruce Perry, What Happened to Me, or What Happened to You, is another great book. And these books don't tell you really how to do the work. It just gives you an idea where to look to do the work, and to realize that we've all had trauma. Some people more than others, and it really creates, once you start learning more, compassion. So when I see something happen or someone responding to something, an example might be, there's a partner, they're dating one another, and the woman gets pregnant. The man might run away because of his fear, and he runs away because he doesn't know what to do. So none of the books tell you really what to do, but we can start seeking out different modalities. There's another great book by Mark Wallen, and It Didn't Start With You, and it really looks at genetics, so epigenetics, and it also looks at what has been passed down through environments, your family environment, your parents' environment, what they were raised in, because it really just gets passed down and morphs into your parents' family. And then if you have your own kids, how many of us say, oh my gosh, did I just sound like my mother? I'm turning into my mother. That's how it happens. It's just, that's what we know. And so in kind of closing, it's really important to have compassion from where you came from, regardless of how much trauma and horrific things have happened to each one of us, that our parents didn't know better. They didn't have a chance or an opportunity in their own childhoods and their own experiences. We're really living in a time where there's a ton of resources. There's practitioners. It's okay to go get help. They didn't have that. I mean, we can actually tune in and do a Skype session together. Our parents didn't have that. Their grandparents didn't have it. And it wasn't really a locked-in society where we didn't talk. We had party lines where if I picked up the phone to phone you, 10 other neighbors might be listening. It's not like I'm going to say, oh my gosh, guess what just happened to me? We were very closed. So the more that we can go and do some research, read some books, but when you're reading a book, don't read it cover to cover. If something is triggering, put it down. The best thing we can do is start listening to our nervous system. And if something is disturbing me, do I have to override my system and stay there? Or can I leave the room and re-regulate? Let my system come down so I can come back? Another great book, if you have kids at home, is Daniel Siegel's Whole Brain Child. He uses a little diagram that this is your brain, prefrontal cortex, your brain stem, and this is my limbic brain. And so when a child flips their lid and has all of a sudden a hissy fit, you can't have a conversation with them when they're having a tantrum. We need to let them come down so their lid is back on, they can be back in their thinking brain, and then we can have a conversation. So the next time your child has a tantrum, support them. Just let them know it's safe and it's okay to move that big energy. Don't stuff it inside of them. Let them express themselves. Just hear. Don't try to say that's not true, it didn't hurt, you're not bleeding. Let them have the experience so they can stay in contact with their own interoception and figure out what words describe what's going on in their own bodies, and don't try to say, oh, I think you have butterflies. No.
Exactly. I think that we're getting a warning that we are almost done. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
You can find me. I'm located in West Vancouver.
Yeah.
I'm Verdell Jessup. There's not too many Verdells out there, but thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thank you. And I'm going to save this to my page so that anybody watching the replay, I'm tagging you in the description as well. And thank you so much for watching, whether you tuned in live or you watched the replay later. And if you have anything else that you would like me to talk about on this live stream, please let me know.